The year was 2024. Liam Thorne was a man who had spent the better part of his life chasing shadows and whispers in the forgotten, desolate corners of America. He was a professional seeker of the unexplained, a collector of urban legends. But this journey was different. As he steered his car into the dark, suffocating heart of the Appalachian Mountains, he felt a weight in the air he had never experienced before. He was searching for Blackwood Creek. It was a place that didn't exist on most modern maps, and those who knew of its location spoke of it only in hushed tones. If they spoke at all, his obsession with Blackwood Creek had begun with a leaked police bodycam video. The footage was grainy, shaky, and terrifying. It showed an officer entering a dilapidated farmhouse in the dead of night. In the dining room, 5 people sat around a table as if frozen in time. Their eyes were wide with a terror that transcended death, but it was their mouths that haunted Liam's dreams. They were sewn shut with thick, shimmering silver wire. In the video, the wire seemed to pulse and twitch, as if it were a living organism feeding on the skin it pierced. Liam didn't know then that in the deep hollows of Blackwood, silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is a sentient thing. It is a predator that listens to the vibration of a heartbeat, the friction of cloth, and the unforgivable sin of a human voice. As he drove deeper into the ancient woods, the sky turned a bruised purple and rain began to fall. It wasn't a normal rain. It fell in heavy, rhythmic sheets that sounded like drumming fingers on the roof of his car. The trees on either side of the narrow dirt track leaned inward, their gnarled branches stretching over the road like skeletal fingers reaching for a soul. The air inside the car grew thick and metallic, carrying the sharp scent of wet iron and the sickly sweet stench of rotted pine. Then, without warning, the world went dead. His car engine didn't just stall, it didn't sputter or cough. It simply ceased to be, as if the very concept of energy had been sucked out of the metal. The headlights flickered once and died, plunging him into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. Liam stepped out of the car into the freezing mud. The silence hit him like a wall. It was then that he felt the first prickle of unease. He felt the sensation of 1,000 invisible eyes fixed on his lips. They weren't watching his hands or his movements. They were waiting for him to speak. They were hungry for a sound. He hiked for over a mile through the dense, tangled brush, his flashlight beam struggling to pierce the oppressive fog. Finally, he saw it, the old weaver's place. It was a sprawling, Victorian nightmare of a house. It was blackened by time and rot. The structure seemed to lean at an impossible angle, as if it were mourning. The front door stood wide open, a gaping black maw inviting him into a throat of darkness. Liam drew a deep, shaky breath and stepped across the threshold. The floorboard beneath his boots didn't just creak. They groaned with a deep, guttural resonance that sounded like the final breaths of dying men. He moved toward the back of the house, his flashlight cutting through dust motes that looked like powdered bone floating in the stagnant air. He reached the dining room and froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. There they were, the 5 figures from the video. They sat perfectly still at the long oak table, their skin waxy, gray, and translucent like old parchment. Their clothes were tattered and coated in a century of dust. As Liam moved closer, the silver wire threaded through their lips began to vibrate. It hummed with a low, sickening frequency. One of the figures, a woman in a decayed floral dress, slowly turned her head. It was a wet, grinding movement. She had no eyes, only hollow, dark sockets filled with tangles of that same shimmering silver wire. Her cheeks stretched and tore against the stitches as she forced her jaw open. A single, muffled warning escaped through the blood-slicked wire. Don't use your voice. He feeds on the sound. Panic, raw and cold, surged through Liam's veins. He turned to flee, but the hallway he had just walked through was gone. In its place stood a solid wall covered in peeling, yellowed wallpaper. When he touched it, he recoiled in horror. The wall was warm. It was soft and yielding, pulsating slightly under his palm. It felt exactly like human skin. He was no longer inside a house. He was inside something that was breathing with him. He spent what felt like days wandering through corridors that looped back on themselves in impossible geometries. Every door led to another room of horrors. He found a study filled with the Weaver's legacy. On a desk lay a leather-bound journal from 1842, belonging to a man named Elias Weaver. Liam read the frantic, jagged handwriting. Elias Weaver believed that the human voice was a gateway, a leak through which ancient, hungry evils could enter the world. To save the soul, Weaver wrote, one must seal the exit. Liam realized with a jolt of terror that the house was a grand design, a massive trap built to harvest the screams of the living and turn them into a silent power. He descended into the cellar, hoping for an exit, but found only the larder of a monster. Rows upon rows of glass jars lined the stone walls, glowing with faint, sickly bioluminescence. Inside the jars, preserved in a clear, viscous liquid, were hundreds of human tongues. They were still twitching. Each jar had a hand-painted name on it. He saw the names of missing hikers from the 50s, local police officers who had vanished decades ago, and names of people he had researched in his own files. Then his flashlight beam landed on a jar at the end of the shelf. His breath hitched. The label read, Liam Thorne. The jar was open. It was empty. It was waiting. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the floorboards above. It wasn't the sound of a human footstep. It was a heavy metallic scraping, like giant needles being dragged across dry wood. The Weaver was coming. Liam could see him in his mind. A 10-foot-tall shadow with elongated, silver fingers that clicked like knitting needles. The creature had no face, only a giant, gaping, fleshy ear where its features should be. It didn't need to see Liam. It was listening to the frantic rhythm of his fear. It was tracking the sound of his blood rushing through his veins. Liam scrambled into a narrow crawl space behind the jars, pushing through what he thought were thick cobwebs. But as the strands brushed against his face, he realized the truth. He was crawling through miles of human hair that had been stuffed into the foundations of the house to muffle the sounds from outside. He dug frantically through the earth and the hair, his fingernails bleeding, until he finally burst through a hole in the ground near the creek bank. He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned, falling to the mud and the rain until he reached his car. By some impossible miracle, the engine roared to life the moment he turned the key. He slammed the car into gear and drove like a madman, his tires screaming on the wet asphalt. He sobbed with a relief so intense it made him dizzy. As the dark woods of Blackwood Creek receded in his rear-view mirror, he reached for his phone. He had to tell someone. He had to warn the world. He pressed the phone to his ear, but when he opened his mouth to speak, nothing came out. Not a scream, not a whisper, not even the sound of breath. He looked into the rear-view mirror again, his eyes widening in the dim light of the dashboard. His lips were not moving. He felt a cold, sharp, rhythmic prickling in his gums. He looked down at his hands on the steering wheel, but the steering wheel was gone. Instead, he saw his own fingers moving instinctively, expertly, weaving a shimmering silver wire through the air. He wasn't driving away. He had never left. He was sitting back at that dinner table, surrounded by the gray, waxy figures. The trees outside the window were perfectly still. The last thing Liam Thorne ever heard wasn't the sound of the wind or the rain. It was his own voice coming from the car radio in the corner of the room. The voice was cold, distorted, and layered with 1,000 other stolen voices. It said, "Thank you for the words, Liam. We needed a new narrator." The silence finally won. And now, as you sit here in the quiet, listening to the end of the story, you have to wonder, how many words do you have left in your life? How much sound have you wasted? Be very careful, because the Weaver is always listening, and he is very, very hungry for your next breath.